Welcome to the Mindfulness of Singing, and I'm Denise, your sassy, spunky scientist.
And I'm Tony, your bubbly, big-hearted flower child.
Our podcast features practical tips and tools for a journey of transformation using the healing power of your voice.
Each podcast, we will delve into the mind, body, and spirit connection by interviewing inspirational guests, sharing personal stories, and discussing the most recent scientific research.
Tune in and join our community of mindful singers.
What's your... Hi, Tony.
Good morning, Denise. She's right at it this morning. You must have had several cups of coffee. You're ready to roll. What's your topic?
Well, I certainly had a great big cup for sure because I was kept up all night by my little Yorkie dog. Oh man, was I considering taking her to the pound at 3:00 this morning? But anyway,
don't be waking up, Denise. You'll go to the pound. You got that, Dawn?
So it's true. Sleep is really important in this house.
It is so important.
Okay,
but today's
topic, what's your subject? I want to hear. I hear you have one.
Of course. Well, there's always so many things for us to talk about and enjoy exploring together, but I'm trying to stick with something that relates to whoever our guest is. And today's guest is Dr. Shannon Coates, who you know very well. She is your Canadian twin sister, I think. She's
only she's like 6'2" and I'm 5'2", so
I didn't say you were identical twins, but you're both spunky blondes.
Oh, yeah, we are a lot alike for sure.
You're a lot alike.
No one would mistake us. No one would ask us if we're twins.
I meant more in simpatico.
Yes, we are soul sisters.
Also simpatico.
Sure.
And Shannon's thing, her jam is she is a teacher's teacher. So if you're listening and you're a voice teacher and you're like, I could really use some brushing up of my skills. I've got a home studio and it's not really able to network at the moment. She's your gal, and she offers the Voice Ped Undegree. Yeah, she's an all-around dynamic lady, and we're excited to have her this morning. And I am excited to attend the Move Better, Feel Better Summit. It's a Feldenkrais event for 10 days.
Yes, when is that?
It's May 1st through the 10th, but the one that you don't want to miss and your friend will nag you about is May the 2nd, because on that one they're going to have James Nestor and Patrick McEwen together, both of those powerhouses on that. And today I was watching they're offering, it's a power-packed summit and some freebies long before. They've got a Facebook page. I'm not connected. I get no credit for this. Anyway, something I listened to this morning that I think both of us really find fascinating is a seminar called Molding the Mouth, Exploring the Relationship Between Oral Posture, the Skull, and Vocal Artistry, with Robert Susan, certified Feldenkrais practitioner. And he was sharing about a book that's our next read, I'll have you know.
Okay.
I haven't read it yet, so please don't hold me to this, but it has fabulous reviews, and it's similar in concept and thought. Breathe, and we both inhaled that book, pun intended. It was fantastic book.
We did.
And Nestor talks a lot about the fact that facial shape has been changing. I did a lot of research before, even part of breath work. In fact, you may remember me, Denise, saying to you about mewing and how you can change your jaw. And so this practitioner was saying by changing your resonating chambers, you can change your voice and your vocal artistry through this. And so the book is Jaws, and it has a big teeth,
shark.
Skull.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it says the story of a hidden epidemic. And
that sounds good. When's it? Is it out now? Can I order it now?
Yes, 2018. Let's see who reads it the quickest. It's science-based.
I took a speed reading course, girl. You don't want.
I know.
You don't want to. You don't want to compete with me on that.
Okay, I've lost.
Already.
But you don't have much time, so I can, but anyway. The the premise is that he partnered with a scientist to research the things that I have been researching all along about dentists and about teeth. And he just, in reading the book, just not so much practicing all these drills, changed his face. And in the class, he's talking about how he's changing. And I think, yeah, I haven't gotten there, but I'm sure it relates to mewing. So I'm wondering if our dynamic guest has any interest or pursuit in all of her vocal pedagogy work about, I know she talks about the tongue because it's the root of all evil, as the Bible says, and in singing too. And it all kind of goes together, and the jaw is for chewing food and, not singing. So it has to be the other way. But anyway, I'm curious what Shannon's latest and greatest thoughts are.
I love what Shannon does because, and she can talk about this, but how many times do you know people who get an undergrad in music, like music ed or something like that, and they have kids, they decide they want to stay home, or maybe they have a hard time, they decide that's not what they want to do. They decide to set up a home studio, and then they realize that their undergrad did not give them enough vital information to have a studio of their own, and they feel, a little out of water. So Shannon helps those people have a better grasp, better knowledge, without the huge expense of getting a degree.
And getting right to the nuts.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Good. Shannon Coates, part 2.
Well, because
What are you
how's
gonna
it
do?
going?
It's fine. How about you? You
We're
look gorgeous.
good. Oh, thank you. So do you, of course.
Mm.
So tell me,
Beautiful.
we are live and in charge right now.
Already.
That's
we're
right.
rolling.
We are
Amazing.
rolling. So we're so happy to have you, and we want to hear all about all of your new things and new offerings.
So yes, new website is launching at the end of May, 1st of June. That is a whole work in progress, and it is coming. But some of the things that I am doing that are more of a continuation, really, of what I started in March last year or May. So I started to transition out of a traditional independent voice studio model. I started to transition out of that at the end of 2019. So January and February 2020, I was releasing the last of my students, the last of my sort of traditional students. I had a studio of, 6 years old to like 86 years old, and all of the teens and all of the young singers and all of the adult avocational singers, lots of pro singers as well, and especially music theater. I did working with a whole bunch of music theater pro singers and some pro track singers, and the whole gamut of your sort of traditional independent studio. Especially I was working both here in my home studio, which is in a suburb, so I had that suburb studio of like, oh, you teach singing lessons? My 12-year-old wants singing lessons, has always wanted singing lessons. Why don't I sign up? Kind of, and unbeknownst to them, they were getting like a really, really good voice teacher, which they obviously didn't know, because I was just lived 2 doors down, and how, I was a voice teacher of convenience, which many independent studio teachers are, of course. And I also had a studio in Toronto where I was teaching, a different set of singers. But I transitioned out of that because I was starting to work so much more with voice teachers, and working with voice teachers, developing resources for voice teachers to be able to not only understand the fundamentals of, anatomy and physiology, which I love, and which I think there's a real need for especially, like I said, in our independent voice teacher community, but also the thing that I think is missing sort of across the board, which is how to teach, like really, truly, how do I teach? Like having the information is one thing, but like, how do I get this information into my students is a whole other thing, right? And how do I encourage deeper learning, and how do I sort of maximize learning in my students? So that is kind of missing across the board, because we all tend to, unless we did an education degree, we all kind of tend to teach the way we were taught. And as you teach for a while, you teach for 10, 15 years, you start to realize, okay, there might be more to this than what I'm doing right now. I may not be doing this as efficiently as I could be, or I might be missing a few things here. And you start to look around and kind of gather in resources. But so I wanted to make sure that I was leaving enough time and that I had the brain space to be able to develop those kinds of resources for voice teachers. And I didn't have that running a full-time studio. I just did not. So I started to transition out at the end of February. The end of February was when I released my final teenagers and young singers. I had already released all of my adult avocational singers and, all of those guys. And so I only had a couple of, I was only at that point working then with voice teachers in the studio. And so then COVID hit. What do you know? And then, and my intention had always been to develop, I had already developed the Vocal Instrument 101, which is an online self-directed course that you can take, which is mostly anatomy and physiology with lots of applicable stuff, right? So here's why this thing works when you use it, and here's how to talk about this a little bit more efficiently. If you were trained in this way, you might understand this, whereas probably this is a little bit more appropriate. So it's kind of, but it's self-directed online, no interaction with me except for, my face on the screen. So I'd already developed that. And what I really wanted to start to develop were classes and courses that, in my mind, I was like, okay, I guess, well, I can gather people in Toronto, and, we can do like a weekend, or like, like maybe we have an institute, or like, like trying to figure out how, the logistics of getting people into the same room, right? And of course, COVID, and now everyone is all in the same, like we're all in the same room right now, and across the country, across North America. And so that kind of kickstarted things for me, and made things possible a lot sooner and in a different way, and to far more people than I thought possible. It was really, one of the great benefits of what's happened with COVID is just this availability, accessibility, the ability to reach lots of people across the world, from my home office here in Holland Landing, Ontario, which is, like I live 45 minutes north of Toronto, in the little kind of commuter town. So so that whole transition started to take place around May. May was the first time I did a group cohort working with singers who had either done the Vocal Instrument 101, like my course, or who had done something similar, a still course, or who had done an undergraduate class in voice ped or something along those lines, so that we were all kind of coming in with the same level ish of understanding around the fundamentals around, anatomy and physiology. So that was a 4-week, I think there were 7 teachers in that one initially, the initial one, and from all over the place. So India and all over the States. We were covering 4 different time zones, like trying to make it work. Yeah, it was amazing, right? It was amazing. So and that became kind of the model for how I wanted to work going forward. And that group, by the way, is still they still talk to each other over Marco Polo. They still have like a big group chat that they go into. They very lovely. I call them the OGs, like the original gangstas, but they very, very lovingly started their own Marco Polo group so that I wasn't like 500 messages behind on Marco Polo. It was giving me anxiety because I wasn't checking it. But so they've really, that's continued to grow, which is very, very cool. But that initial one, like I said, has really been the model going forward. So some of the way that I've structured now, shorter time periods, but the same kind of, because it's by week 3, people start to get a little bit like, wow, this is a lot, because it's a lot of interaction, right? Like the practicums that I'm doing are all about like super immersive. You're going to want to set aside at least 4 hours a week to interact, and probably more like 10 to have the interaction. I've done several now where it's a subject focused. So the last one I did was child voice. And we had 10 voice teachers again. I think we covered 5 or 6 time zones. I mean, that one was crazy. This is so many time zones.
I don't know how you do that. It's so hard.
Well,
I've tried to do, I've had some things like Healthy Voice Initiative and the Healthy
Yes.
Voice Protocol, stuff like that. And trying to find a time where I'm not on there at 10 o'clock at night is like,
so here's the way,
or 7 o'clock in the morning.
in the morning, exactly.
Ugh.
So here's the way that I've kind of come across structuring these so that it really does work for any time zone. 90% of it is asynchronous. Like 90% of it is asynchronous. So at the beginning of the week, for example, in the child voice one, in the more general, I do a couple a year that are more general, that are, again, you need to have the fundamentals already. So have taken my course or have done another kind of fundamentals course. So those ones are a little bit more general. But for example, in the child voice 2-week practicum, the beginning of the week, I do a live on Facebook. So that's automatically recorded. It's there. As many people, I do a little bit of a, like, a little survey to see what time might work the best, but it's about 20 to 40 minutes live, where I'm talking about something really specific or 3 really specific things to do in the studio this week that will, that in the child voice case relates specifically to teaching children. In other cases relates to changing our teaching methodology and how we communicate, or what kind of language we're using, or ways to think about an exercise or something along those lines. So really specific, practical, applicable things. And then we also do, I also do another one on the Wednesday or Thursday, which is more of a like, here's why we did these things. Here's what you may be discovering about this, and here's why this is working. Here are all the, here's some more information behind, here's the science, here's why this works. And so those 2 lives are completely, I do try to make them, like I said, at a time when the majority of folks are going to be able to tune in, but you don't have to tune in, and the live is there on in our private Facebook group, and you can come at any time to rewatch it and to look at all the comments as they're coming through, and to comment, and to do all the to have that engagement. So that's anytime. And then it's sort of 24/7 Marco Polo. So whenever people ask questions, have engagement, want further explanation, I go onto the Marco Polo group and either, throw a couple of questions to think about, or some other things to consider, more explanations. And the teachers then are all coming in as well. And again, that Marco Polo is a video sharing app. So that's all completely asynchronous. So you can go on there for like 5 hours a day at like 2 in the morning if you want to, your time, or you can, you don't have to be on there to see the other person talking. You go on there and watch their video, and then you respond to their video, and then someone responds to your video. So there's this conversation going on that is completely asynchronous. It can happen any time of the day or night. So that conversation is where the real magic happens, to be honest. And folks then also will upload a video, or just take a video directly of them teaching, obviously getting permission from their students, but of them teaching, or of a question that they have, or in many cases of like, okay, I tried this thing. I'm not sure I understand that I did it correctly, but I got this result. Is that what we're looking for? And then other people chime in, or I tried this thing. It's amazing. I'm never going back, right? Like lots of that kind of like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I wasn't doing this thing, or all I needed to do was tweak this thing. So lots of that kind of back and forth, very supportive, lots of folks from different walks of life. In like I said, in the child voice, almost all folks who have, a more traditional independent studio, but in the general teacher practicum, that's all walks of life. So there have been academic teachers in there. There have been, purely CCM or contemporary teachers who don't have, a Western classical degree. They have a jazz degree, for example, or a music theater degree. Folks who are teaching classrooms, folks who are teaching, it's like the broadest range, right, of teachers, and everybody just learning from each other, which is, my heart. So the only thing that is synchronous in those groups that I really try to make synchronous is we do have one group discussion per week. So those ones I do try to make as synchronous as possible. So I send out a poll to see what times might work. So far, I've been able to make it work so far, and that's just once a week for 60 to 90 minutes, depending on how we structure it. And in the specialized groups, I have an expert come in and do a Q&A. We have Nikki Loney come in for the Q&A for the child voice. I'm going to have Allison Davies come in. I don't know if you know Allison Davies or not, but she's a person who works with neurodivergent folks. So that's, she's a registered music therapist who specifically works with neurodivergent folks. So she's going to come in for the neurodivergent, working with neurodivergent folks.
I need that class. No, seriously. So, I didn't get any of that kind of stuff in my music ed degree back in the day, right? And, and I have more and more neurodivergent students in my studio, and I literally don't know what to do.
Yeah. So explain, you read right off my list, because I know this is one of your hot topics. First of all, what is it? Why is it important to you personally? And some tips about it, because everybody may not know what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So as you're saying, Denise, like there's so many more neurodivergent folks coming into not only coming into voice studios, but really coming into university settings as well, right? Like teachers in university settings are more and more working with folks who are neurodivergent. So neurodiversity is the sort of overall term that was coined to talk more about the movement toward accepting the fact that we all have different brains and we all process in different ways, and we all have different ways of taking in information and interacting with the world. So neurodiversity is the sort of overall movement, the term for the overall movement. And then neurodivergence has kind of come out of that movement and refers to specifically to things that are different in the brain, divergent in the brain, that will be diagnosed, such as autism, such as ADHD, such as Tourette's. OCD has been considered, or can be in some corners, is considered a neurodivergence as well, as part of the neurodivergent community. And often these neurodivergences are clustered, right? So often they actually come together. So you'll often have folks who have an autism diagnosis, for example, will often also have an ADHD diagnosis. So those often come together. And sometimes you'll have someone who's diagnosed with autism who probably should have been ADHD, and vice versa. So often you'll have an ADHD diagnosis when it probably was actually an autism diagnosis, or both. So there's a kind of community evolving out of the fact that we're getting more and more diagnoses done, and as well as the fact that we are now recognizing what neurodivergence looks like in females, both biological and sociologically, socially females and biologically females. And both of those words are kind of awkward, but not exactly what. But if you were raised socially female, and if you are biologically female, you will likely the likelihood of you being getting a diagnosis as a child or even as a teenager is much, much lower than if you are socialized male and biologically male. So because we see all of these all of the things that we see that we recognize as autism, for example, or ADHD, for example, all of those things that we recognize as being the outcome of having a neurodivergent brain in that way are almost exclusively the things that we see in the male brain rather than in the female brain. So there's quite a difference actually. Autism looks very different in a female brain than it does in a male brain. And again, whether that is hormones or socialization or biology or whatever it is, it just is, there is a difference there. So with the rise now of the recognition of neurodivergence in females and in the female brain, we're also then getting a surge in people who are talking about this in a way that is, I mean, women drive movements, right? So we're getting this surge in this movement behind, like, hey, you ignored me or tried to make me something I wasn't for a very long time. I'm not good with that anymore. And I don't just want autism awareness, I want autism acceptance. So we need these things that you're talking about that are neurotypical in the way that we must interact in society. I'm not interested in interacting in society in that way anymore. I want to be accepted for who I am. So this is sort of driving a movement in neurodivergent communities, so this overall neurodiversity movement is really coming to the fore. And part of the reason we're seeing more and more neurodivergent folks in our secondary and tertiary institutions is because of younger diagnoses, where those folks then are being able to be included in classrooms in such a way that they're being successful now. So now they're included in classrooms, and they're rather than just being like that quirky kid who can't like get it together, and who, it's sorry that you keep failing because your desk is messy, for example, rather than being that quirky kid, you're now being recognized as having just a neurodivergence. And here's the way that I can create a classroom that is where you don't have to ask for accommodations, where it's absolutely inclusive. And so then those folks then are having the opportunity to not only be successful in high school, they're being successful now and being able to get into tertiary institutions, into universities. And so we're seeing a lot more of that neurodivergence in universities as well, and lots and lots and lots in the classroom or in the independent studio. So that's where my real focus is in the independent studio. And I've done a bunch of lives recently about inclusivity and understanding neurodivergence. The last one I did was on last week was on creating inclusive cancellation policies. So because the goal, or the privilege, I think the real privilege of us as independent teachers is that we can structure our studios to be completely inclusive. We can 100% structure our studios to be absolutely inclusive. And the goal for me, the thing that I dream about is having studios, having independent studios, especially where no parent has to ask for an accommodation because the studio already does all the things that would be considered accommodation, right? No parent has to advocate for their kid to be successful because all of those things are in place for their kid to be successful already. So that's
Can
sort
you
of, yeah.
can you give some specific examples? What types of things would already be in place?
So from the, for example, from the, say, in terms of a cancellation policy, I mean, I'm not advocating that we as independent teachers should not get paid if our students don't show up, but I am advocating that you have a policy in place where it's okay for a student to not show up to every single lesson every single time, because you've got other things that can happen if that student is unable to show up. So autistic folks, for example, don't sleep well. In general, they don't sleep well. So knowing that I'm not sleeping well, staying up, I've got this anxiety in my head, and that just ramps up anxiety. Anybody who doesn't sleep well, if you've got a mental illness, right, anxiety, any of those things that create the not sleeping well. Anybody who doesn't sleep well knows this, where you like, it just ramps and ramps and ramps, and then you're not sleeping well, and then like the next day is looking like a horror show, and you're terrified that you're not going to be able to function. And then you have a voice lesson, and especially say as a teenager or even an adult, where you're like, you're behind the cue ball, right? Like it's devastating to try to go to a voice lesson. And especially if you love singing and you love your voice teacher and you really want to please them, right? You really want to do the thing that they're asking you to do. But I only slept for 2 hours last night. And not only that, but I was like, I've been extremely ramped up and anxious the entire day, right? So mental illness, folks with chronic illnesses, for example, Crohn's or Ehlers-Danlos or something along those lines, where something could flare up on you. You can't give your teacher 72 hours notice because I'm having a Crohn's flare up and I can't come to my lesson, right? Like you can't give your teacher 72 hours notice for that, or 24 or whatever. Other things like folks who have folks who are in wheelchairs, for example. If you're in a wheelchair, it is really challenging to to be able to have the transportation to get to a voice lesson, like if you're teaching in person, to get to a voice lesson. Children who with sort of unstable homes, or parents who are not speaking to each other, or where there's only one parent or one caregiver, or who's trying to juggle all the things and try to get you to your voice lesson and maybe can't. So many things contribute, and so many levels of privilege contribute to students getting to their voice lessons every single week on time. Like, so many things have to come together for you to be. And we as voice teachers, if we have this expectation that you're going to come to your voice lesson every single week, and we put that into our policies, that's a lot of assumptions to make for our students, right? Like, that's a lot of assumptions to make there. And you are also then really kind of weeding out for the folks who have who have a home life, a specific kind of home life, for example, who have a specific money level, what's that called?
Socioeconomic.
Exactly. Your kind of, and folks who don't have chronic illnesses, folks who do not have mental illnesses, folks who are not neurodivergent. I mean, you're really kind of weeding out for those folks, right? So that's the sort of thing behind that. And then the way that we set up a way to set up our studio policies, cancellation policies now, is just to have in the cancellation policy, ideally, I'd love to see you every single week. I know this isn't going to work for every single person, and I'm cool with that. Here are things that we will do if you can't make it to your lesson. And you just have a whole list of all the things that we can do. If you want to have a synchronous lesson, even though you can't be here in person, I mean, if you're teaching in person, but if you want to have a synchronous lesson, and even though you can't be here in person, here's what we're going to do. If you've got a migraine that you can't bear to look at, or you're at the beginning of a migraine, you can't bear to look at a screen, that's fine. We're going to go on the phone, and we're going to have like gentle warm-ups, and maybe talk about a few things on the phone. No problem. If you're going to, if you can make it, say your Uber falls through, or say your van, your special van that is supposed to bring you, because you're in a wheelchair, is supposed to bring you to your lesson, falls through, or say you just don't want to spend that 2-hour round trip or 4-hour round trip to get to your voice lesson, that's fine too. We can do it synchronously online now, right? Like, and that's completely acceptable now. Yay. So we can do this all online. That's totally fine if you can't make it to the studio. If you need to do it asynchronously, also fine. Here's what I'm going to do, or here are the options that I'm going to do in the time that you would have been in the studio with me. I'm going to ask me any question. I'm going to send you all the research I can find on that subject. So say you can't make it into the studio because you have Crohn's. Let me do all the research I can do on singing with Crohn's. I'll send you all that information. Or let me do for a child. I'm going to send you my listening. I'm going to send you a playlist. We're going to talk about it the next time I see you. I'm going to send you a character study worksheet that you can work out on if you're working on a role. I'm going to send you every single alphabet who's ever existed. You're going to get a whole playlist of all the alphabets, and we're going to talk about which one is your favorite when I see you next. I'm going to send you all of my 3 top apps for sight reading, and you can choose which one is your favorite app for sight reading, and we're going to figure out some sight reading together. There are literally, it is unlimited, the amounts of things that you can offer to your students, so they don't have to feel guilty or like they're, so as voice teachers, sometimes, especially when we first start teaching, we kind of go into, and this is also this is a self-reflection thing too. We kind of go into setting our studio policies with a little bit of a like, if I don't set it up in a specific way, someone's going to take advantage of me, right? So we kind of have this fear that I'm going to be taken advantage of. And that, for me, you need to figure that out, because we teach people how to treat us. And so if you feel that people are going to take advantage of you, then you maybe aren't vetting your students very well, first of all, or there's something going on with you that you've got to figure out, right? So that is, for me, that's not a good reason to not have an inclusive cancellation policy. So the other thing that goes along with this is setting up your studio in such a way that that no one is paying on a per lesson basis, right? So no one's paying no one's paying you on like, I have my lesson on, this hour, this hour, this hour, and this hour, and I pay for this hour, this hour, this hour, and this hour. So this is something that we need to kind of turn around in our own brains as independent teachers as well, especially to kind of get out of the like hourly pay for the hour mindset and into the you're paying as a client for all of my experience and all of my understanding and all of the things that we do in the administration. And this 1 hour time together is just the final output, right? This is just the final thing. So transitioning teachers from like pay by the hour, and so if I don't see you for that hour, I don't get paid, into you pay on a monthly fee, and here's what's included in your monthly fee. Or some kind of tuition setup where you're not, so you're not out, and also so you don't feel badly. That's the other thing. Teachers, especially at the beginning, we feel a little bit badly if they don't come, if they don't get their lesson, and then, I feel like I have to make it up. You don't have to make it up. No, you don't. They're going to get lots and lots and lots of great information from you if you just set it up this way, right? And you set it up that way right from the beginning. It's all in your policies. A parent then who is parenting a mentally ill teenager, for example, who literally may not be able to leave the house, or who may not be able to, show up online, even though they might want to, they may not be able to, or they're in the hospital. I mean, if you're working with teenagers, it's highly likely that you have at some point been working with someone who has been in the hospital for mental health challenges. So that's all in your policy. And then a parent looks at that and says, oh my gosh, that's amazing. What? I don't even have to tell that teacher that this student, that this person might not be able to make it to lessons. It's just right in there. Amazing. All I have to do is say, give them, you can still give the notice, of course, but like, all I have to do is say, hey, so-and-so can't come for their lesson today. Can you send her a playlist, or can you send her whatever? You can have a whole list of things that they can send. Okay, I've talked about that long enough.
No, I mean, that's good. I think that's great.
They got their money's worth out of this podcast right from that alone, just because that's some specific things you can apply as a studio teacher. So,
I mean, this is more challenging to apply in the academic studio, of course, simply because of how much, because the outcomes are the required outcomes are so much different, right? In an independent studio, I get to set up the outcomes however I want. I can say this is going to be you're going to sing in our end of the year recital, or you're going to contribute to the end of year recital by creating a poster or whatever. I can do that, no problem. I can't do that in an academic setting. So an academic setting is more challenging. Just to your question there, Denise, earlier about like, how I think the main thing for academic teachers is to start to recognize, right? Just starting to recognize and say, this behavior that I'm seeing here, this is not because the student is lazy, or because the student is defiant, or because the student is, not smart or whatever, right? This behavior that I'm seeing here, this is being caused by overwhelm, anxiety, some other kind of, whatever the other thing is that's happening in the brain. That's what Alison Davies, I think her program actually is called, The Brain is the Behavior, or the behavior is the brain, or something along those. I can't remember what it is, but it's something along those lines, making that real connection between what's happening in the brain is why those behaviors are showing up in the person. So starting to recognize those at the very least, and then really knowing what the actual possible accommodations or ways that I can set up the studio, and ways that I can set up attendance, ways that I can set up, again, this sort of asynchronous work, ways that I can set up asynchronous work that will work within the system, and also what actual accommodations are available to that student, right? So students coming into the academic system, if they do have a diagnosis, or if they do know that something's going on, they will, they should, not should, I hate the should, but hopefully they will take advantage of the accessibility center, or whatever it's called at your in your institution, but hopefully they will register themselves with the accessibility centers, and then talk to their accessibility liaison, or the mentors they have there, about specific things that they can put into their learning plan that they can then bring to their teachers and say, here are specific ways that I can, that are going to help me to be able to be successful, that we can implement. It does mean that you're doing more work, right? Because you've got to do some things specifically for students. Unlike in the independent studio, like I said, if I can just make this happen for every single person, right? Like, it's my studio. I can just make this the thing that everybody gets to do, right? I can make these options open to anybody, rather than having to make it an accommodation or outside of what I do. But in the system, in the academic system, it's not, unfortunately, or whatever, fortunately. I mean, it is what it is. That's all. It just is what it is. So. And the other sort of conundrum there is that often students in the academic system, I don't know if you've come across this as well, Denise, but often students in the academic system don't want to necessarily either don't know, haven't had a diagnosis, don't know that there's something going on with their brains, or think that living with this level of anxiety is perfectly normal, or think that being depressed is normal, or whatever, right? Like they have this sort of like, don't know that they're not functioning typically, if you will. I've got that in big quotes for anybody who's listening, but that this isn't typical function, or even if they do have a diagnosis, won't necessarily go to the accessibility center, right? Often there's a sort of like, I want to do this independently. I don't want to be different from everybody else. I don't want to have special accommodations. I don't want to, like, I've been fighting my whole life to like try to be normal, quote unquote. And so there can be this real, negative around having to go to the accessibility center and having to kind of come up with this plan for myself because I want to just be a normal adult, right? Again, big quotes there. So that can be problematic as an academic teacher, because at least at the institution I teach at, I can only give you so many accommodations. Like I can only do so much until because I need the accessibility center to tell me, right? Like I need the okay from the accessibility center for you specifically. I can't just recognize, ooh, that's probably, this kind of assessment probably isn't going to work so well for you, and just give you a different assessment from the rest of the class, right? Like I can't do that in a class situation, or in an academic situation. So that, I think, our hands are a little bit tied in the academic situation, unless
absolutely
you can really encourage someone to go. And the other thing that I have found useful actually is talking to and so often in my experience, the accessibility center folks are like run off their feet. They're just going crazy. They just do not have enough resources, right? So if I can get through to someone there, I will often say like, hey, by the way, here are some specific ways that here are some specific things I can put into place in the course. Why don't you ask for those then? By the way, here are some things that I can do. And if you could make those official as an official, accommodation, then that would be amazing, because then I can do them officially and not for whoever needs it, rather than, it's looking like I'm favoring someone or something along those lines, right? Yeah.
Well, you have given us so much information, and so I'm sure people are inspired and they want to work with you. How do they get on board to take advantage of all of this information?
Well, the mailing list is the best way to get on there, and you can just go to Shannon-Coates.com. If you don't get that dash in there, you're going to get a triathlete from the States who seems lovely, but is unwilling to give me the Shannon-Coates.com. I don't know why. She had it first, so that's fine. It's fine. So Shannon-Coates.com, and then all of the information about, upcoming stuff is all on there. And then, like I said, if you're on the mailing list, you'll have lots of information coming at you, and also the socials. I'm on Instagram at VoicePed. All the socials. I'm on Facebook.
Are you on TikTok?
Stuff. No, I am not on all the socials.
Okay.
Is your
cat? Come on.
Your cat was famous. I don't know if your cat was on.
No, my teenagers do not. My teenagers have disdain for TikTok. Like it's too, yes, isn't that interesting? They have disdain for it. But I think the older teens, I think maybe in the 16 to 20, I think that little age range, I don't think they like it because it's too young, like the young. I don't know. Who knows? It might just be my kids.
Love you, Shannon. You're awesome. Keep doing what you're doing. Love that you're an advocate for folks that don't often have advocacy in their corner. So
beautiful. Thank you.
Amazing.
Have a beautiful day. Thank you for sharing with us. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Take care.
Ciao.
Thank you so much for listening. We are very grateful that you joined us today.
If you like this podcast, please subscribe, write a review, share it with a friend.